Lauren, thanks so much for coming. Can everyone hear us? Very good, very good sound quality in the tent. I'm very impressed about that. So we have some slides that are going to help us talk through. At the end, we're going to leave quite a lot of time for questions, because I'm sure people have questions for Lauren. So start thinking up what they may be. And Lauren, over to you.
So when Alex and I were talking about this event and what we might have perhaps in common as well, because Alex, you've got your whole kind of background in film, and I've always been obsessed from childhood in cinema. I could never get enough television as a child, and in those days when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of children's television, so I used to watch an awful lot of those matinees, so films on that would come on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, and my sister and I would just sit there watching the television, waiting for the next thing to come on. And back then they'd have these interludes, so there would just be an interval of nothing, and you'd be looking at these lines on the screen, and my parents were far too stingy to buy the Radio Times, so I never knew when something was going to come on and what it was going to be, and sometimes it was Grandstand, and then you just wasted an hour of your life. and then sometimes it was a really, really good...
Sometimes it was Rhubarb and Custard.
Sometimes it was Rhubarb and Custard, but sometimes it was a Cary Grant film or a Joan Crawford film or something, and they were stars, movie stars that and films that I would never have chosen to watch, but because I was so desperate to watch anything, I watched them, and I learned a lot from watching them, because films and the way that they're structured really help with picture book writing, I think, particularly because you're telling a visual story, and you have to, you're often having to hold back on things. I think the films that work the best, often things are reduced.
They're reduced, and also you're showing the story rather than using too many words. I think that's something we were talking about as well, is how films, when they're most successful, and certainly humour, films with humour, they're really showing you the action rather than explaining too much. And I think that's something that Lauren's very interested in as well, in the way that she writes, and also writing very visually, literally the words and the pictures moving together. And I think that is quite a filmic way of writing, and certainly seems to resonate highly with children, which is rather wonderful, and getting them to read.
Well, I got into picture book writing completely by accident. I was one of those people who really didn't know what they wanted to do with their life, and there were so many things I wanted to do, and so the upshot was that I was really doing nothing because I was panicking, and then I went to see a film called Edward Scissorhands, which not all of you will have seen, but perhaps if you're older you will have done, and I loved that because it seemed to be one whole world. It felt like he'd considered every single thing himself, the director, who's Tim Burton, and it is, as Alex was saying earlier when we were chatting about this, it is like a storybook. That
absolutely.
film is very like a fairy tale that's set in a surreal but modern world, and every single thing feels perfectly put together. And that made me think about whether I should actually go to film school. And I thought about it, and then I thought, I can't. I was already gone to 2 art schools, and I felt like, no, you've got to get on with it. So I decided to write something for film, and this is what I wrote, and it sort of turned into a picture book completely by accident. I didn't mean for it to. And it has this, it's difficult to see the slides, but it has this child that talks out of the books at you, and I wanted every bit of the book to be used to tell the story. So you feel like this is a very busy, chaotic household, and this is a child really looking for a space of her own and a bit of privacy. And so I used the end papers, which these papers are really here to stick the book block into the cover. That's what end papers are. But I thought it would be really nice if you actually tell the story right the second you open it. She's talking to you, because she's one of those people that, you know, you could ring on her front door, she'd open the door and she'd tell you something, and before she's even said hello. And I wanted that feeling.
Yeah.
So.
I asked Lauren earlier whether she had, in the same way as Clarice, spent time in the airing cupboard as a young child, and I think you have to tell them, Lauren.
Yes, I did. I spent a lot of time in the airing cupboard because my parents, they were the sort of people who were always inviting people round to the house, but not necessarily people that we knew. But you'd come downstairs on Saturday morning, there'd be somebody standing there chatting to them, and this just happened all the time. And my older sister really hated it. My younger sister and I found it quite amusing, but I did spend a lot of time in the airing cupboard as a result. Sometimes not reading, sometimes just sitting
and thinking.
I'm thinking a lot of thinking. Yeah. But if you read, it's like Nancy Mitford. They seem to spend a lot of time in the airing cupboard too. So maybe it's perfectly normal thing to do.
Probably is.
Yeah. But I also I think I wanted the dialogue in the books. You can't really see it here, but I wanted it to be so everybody has their own typeface, so you can see what their voices sound like. So that was partly a note to a film director. If this got picked up for film, I was thinking, this is what she sounds like, this is what her brother sounds like. And so everyone has their own typeface.
It sounds like you should be directing the film of your book to me. Can you see the slides at all? Are they? You can see them a bit.
Tricky.
Yeah. Claire's saying yes at the back.
Yeah.
So
okay. Yeah. You can see them a bit.
Yeah.
And I work in collage, so you can see that a little bit here. And the lovely thing about working in collage is that you can keep changing your mind all the time, and move things around. And I started working like that because I was a terribly indecisive person, and it really goes into my work. So I never quite know how the picture's going to look at the end. So I started cutting everything out, and that really helped me. And then you can change the scale, and you get lots of really amazing accidents happening as well. And the scene where, in the first Charlie and Lola book, where she's sitting at a wooden table looking at some peas, that only happened because I was a receptionist in a design studio, and I wasn't paid very well, but the advantage to that was they said you can work on your own books while you answer the phones. You just have to make coffee, answer the phones, and go and get us lunch. But I found as they got more successful, the phone was going a lot, and it was really annoying. And so I would often be in the middle of cutting somebody out, in this case Lola, cutting her out, and then I'd have to put her down because just before I was going to glue her onto a piece of paper, the telephone would go. And one day I put her on a pine desk, which was my desk was pine. And I suddenly thought, oh, she looks really amazing. She looks amazing on a pine desk. So I ran out at lunchtime. I ran out to the hardware shop, and I bought some of that sticky back plastic, that you use to cover shelves, that wood effect paper. And that's how it all happened. So
fantastic.
I'm cutting something out, and it might be on. Say if I was wearing your dress, and I think, oh, that would make a lovely wallpaper. And then I take my dress to the photocopier, and then that becomes wallpaper. So.
And the peas were large, I remember.
Yeah.
They were prominent in that frame.
Yes, the peas, yes.
They were in the foreground.
Yeah, yes, they were. Yeah, I took lots of photographs of frozen peas in different bowls and dishes and then cut them out. So
Very good.
Yeah. So, and I mean, the other thing that I did with this Clarice Bean book is I wanted to include adults because it's about a family, and I've always been interested in writing about families because it's the often kind of mundane, sometimes boring, but very, very regularly extraordinary that you get in families or just in a domestic setting. Things that they seem it's like they're not going to be very interesting, but the most bewildering things happen.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way that you draw the characters in the Clarice books, and I think my interest in it as a film project would be to maybe expand out the family characters more, and make it like a more of a sort of Royal Tenenbaums kind of, you know, a portrait of the whole family, and then you could go into their particular stories as well, so you could kind of expand out of it. And then we were just talking earlier about whether Ruby Redfort, who appears in the later Clarice books, who is a detective who is basically Clarice's heroine, whether we would make a film that would have both of them in it together, and how that would work, and that was quite interesting.
Yes, because well, I'll come to it in a minute, because I've got some pictures I can show you, but Ruby really came out of my Clarice Bean chapter books, because I'd written 3 books like this, and then my editor said to me, they're getting very long, Lauren, maybe you should write chapter books, and I didn't think I could, because I'd never written anything long before. And then Ruby, this fictional character, book character that Clarice Bean becomes obsessed by, she became the foil, really, so the structure within the books. And it was rather useful, because you understand a lot more about Clarice Bean's imagination, and also what she feels is lacking in her life, because we're always comparing our lives to other people's, whether fictional or real. And so that was a sort of nice device, really.
Yeah, I think it works really brilliantly in the books.
Yeah, so it was fun. It was fun to do. But I've always sort of loved making things, and so I did this book. It's called The Princess and the Pea, and all of that was made in miniature. And I wanted to work with a photographer, because I thought it would be sort of interesting to work in that collaborative way.
Yeah.
And it was a lot like filmmaking, because it's 3D collage, and you only see the effect when she lights it and shoots it. And before that, it looks quite dead. And I could have brought one of the sets along, because I've still got some of them. And when you look at them, they don't look anything, because, I mean, you see them, I mean, they're sort of charming, but it's hard.
It's like a stop frame animation process.
Yes, it is.
And you're actually, you know, they come alive when they're lit.
Yes,
and
exactly.
You said there was you had to put a lot of faith into this process, because they were not looking anything, and then suddenly they came alive, and they are such beautiful images. I don't know if anyone's seen this book, but do have a look at it. Really incredible. I don't think many people use this process, actually, that I've seen.
Well, I'm not surprised, because
it's really hard.
It took sort of 2 years, and I remember we'd originally had this idea, let's do a whole series of these fairy tales set in dolls' houses, and then after 2 years, I just said, if I ever suggest that again, shoot me, because it's so.
So who actually made the sets?
Me.
You made them?
Yes, and
wow.
so, I mean, some of it, there'll be things here that I borrowed, these little chairs, but there are other things that I did, you know, that had to be made. So you're sort of making this tree trunk house, and you have to figure a way of putting lights into it and windows so that it looks real. And then there are other things.
So the curtain.
This I made, you know, this little bed in the wall, and so all the sets, like say this one, you're making out of mount board or literally cereal boxes, and making panelling, so that it's all an illusion, and then you get some really good key bits, like this beautiful chandelier, which practically costs the same as a real one.
So is that made in miniature?
Yeah. And yes, that's made in
so
miniature.
So that's not a collage, that's an actual set.
So this is an actual
together.
set you can put your hand in.
Yeah.
But then realised that the figures have to be made of folded paper, because dolls just always look like dolls, and it doesn't work. They look rather terrifying. So I had to make all these sort of little paper characters, and fold them and move them.
Amazing.
So it's, but this is that's Polly. Well, you can barely see her, but that's Polly in the background, thinking about that. But here, that big moon at the back of the set is her. She's made that, and she's come up with a way to do that, and it was all quite complicated. But
very beautiful.
It was a lovely project.
Yeah.
It really was.
But you won't be doing another one.
I'm not.
No.
No. No, I don't think I will. No. And then this is obviously Charlie and Lola, who came after Clarice, but it was a fun way of working with two characters, and the whole thing was influenced by the ideals of childhood. Mm-hmm. Those really wonderful 20 minutes that you get in a day where everything just seems so perfect, or an afternoon, because childhood is very sort of like this, but we often remember all those rather sort of honey-coloured things. Yes. And I wanted to bring that out because I think sometimes we forget all of those beautiful parts.
And how children, I think in Charlie and Lola, they really feel like they're in their own world. They're cocooned in their own world, and the parents are very peripheral.
Yeah.
And their relationship with each other is so innocent and interesting. And I just remember reading them to my kids who were here somewhere, and loving the way that the text went round, and we were all like following the text round, and just made me laugh. But story time with those books is the best kind of story time. Thank you for that. Nice. It was so fun.
It's very nice. Well, because I did have one question from an 8-year-old boy who said, "Can you write a book, please, where Charlie actually gets annoyed with Lola?" and I really understood, but I said, you have to remember he's not as perfect as he seems. But I wanted to write about those lovely conversations, because I think as an adult, and what you only find out when you are grown up, is that you can never step back into that world. So there's this sort of melancholy about it in a way, because as a child it feels like it's there forever and ever, but actually you can only be in it when you're that age. It's the Peter Pan thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really wanted to capture that
and to encourage that kind of behaviour in children is very good. I mean, I was horrible to my brother, and I've regretted it ever since.
Have you?
Yeah. Oh. I was always told to look after him, and I should have taken a leaf. Well, the book wasn't written. No. Maybe it would have been a different story.
I don't know. I saw him doing the washing up when I was last here, so he must like you quite a lot still.
Yeah. Well, then maybe that says something. He was doing the washing up. I don't know. It's quite bad, isn't it? Perpetuate.
But it's funny because I was recently, I mean, just a couple of years ago, looking at the Peanuts cartoon, and I was obsessed with Snoopy and Charlie Brown. I just loved it, and I would spend hours and hours trying to get their faces right, and they're deceptively difficult to draw, because if you get one kink of the face wrong, they don't look like Charlie Brown or Sally or Snoopy. That you have to get it perfectly right. And I think, when I look at those pictures, I think subconsciously I was completely influenced when I was doing Charlie and Lola, because actually there aren't any parents or adults in the Peanuts cartoons, and that you just hear this honking voice for anybody adult, and I think that's interesting, because I hadn't put that together at all.
Also, they're very sparing with the lines.
They are.
If you look at the expressions, there's only very few lines to make it work.
It's this,
and it's the same with Charlie and Lola.
Exactly the same with this, and it's funny because I've now got pretty good at drawing them, so I always know when I've gone wrong.
Yes.
But it's quite funny when someone else draws them, and sometimes people get them spot on, but sometimes you just think, So when we were doing the animation, and the designer would have to design it, and I'd be, but you can't, you put her mouth here, her mouth is very, very low down.
Yeah.
Teeny weeny mouth.
And you were saying they tried to make their mouth too big.
Too big, yes.
So because of the dialogue, maybe.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
and they want to show grinning or laughing.
Yeah.
And of course, I'd never done a big laugh mouth before.
Yeah.
And we had to figure all this out. So
It's
it was
really interesting.
It was very complicated.
And I bet you were there.
I was. And they did this thing also. Charlie and Lola, they're quite thin legs and they're quite close together, and they kept doing them like table legs, so they'd be at either side of her dress, and just was so wrong.
Yeah.
So.
It's very difficult bringing a still image to life in that way when they are so characterful in their dialogue and what they say, and then making them move that next step.
How do you make them
very,
walk?
very difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah, how do you make them walk? Exactly.
And you have to get that absolutely right. And
the amount of iterations we went through with Paddington and Paddington films on how he moved, and we had him on a turntable and turned him round, and then as soon as, did he blink, how often did he blink, and all of those, when we had him as an image, a still image just in our concepts, it was so much easier. And then, we had so many discussions about exactly that. And
did they base it on any kind of bear movements as well?
Loosely. When we looked at a lot of bear images, and the animators did.
Yeah.
But mostly it was based on the director, on Paul King. Yeah.
Was it?
Doing lots of walking around and tumbling, because he was Paddington. He was just there. It was brilliant.
That's so funny.
So the animators in these meetings we had would say, do that again, and get their eyes going up and film him, and then that would sort of get absorbed into the...
Did you have a maquette of him, or is it all on screen?
We did. We made a full-size maquette with hair punched in that was really detailed, which didn't come out very often because it was so precious. And then we used that as a lighting reference, but then on set we had various things. We had a sort of stuffed animal version that was quite crude, and then a girl, Lauren, actually, who was 3'6", who sort of stood in for Paddington on set, and lots of tricks anyway. But mainly it was all done in the animation at the end. And so many discussions about movement and facial expressions and how the eyes work. Yeah,
because he's quite complicated the way he moves.
And things that you write a scene and then you have to think, well, could he do that, and could he actually move from there to there in that amount of time? Which you don't have to think about with actors.
No,
because they can. So that was it was quite interesting.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I know. Well, because the detail that we went into with Charlie and Lola was quite something, and we made a Bible, as they call it, of all the things and all the things that they can wear, because that's the other thing. Suddenly, because they kept putting her in cardigans, I said, I don't think she doesn't wear cardigans, but you see that in the first. She's wearing separates in the first series, and in the second one you can see I put my foot down and said, no, she only wears dresses. And so and there are lots of really tiny rules, and so I feel like the second series is definitely my favourite out of the three, because I felt like we really
did you enjoy the process? Did you
It's hard to say, because I found it really interesting, and I'm very glad I did it, but it's so fraught. It's completely different than doing books, because you get a certain time to think, and I really disliked the fact that someone would phone you up and say, can you read this script by tomorrow? Any editorial changes you need to make, and I would do all the dialogue, so I'd go through every script doing the dialogue. And
that sounds like a really harsh deadline, tomorrow.
Oh God, yes. No, it was a lot of tomorrow.
A lot of tomorrow.
Or in 2 days or something. And
then if you can't do it, then it's going to...
So you do it. And so I found it exhausting. But I did love doing things like, they asked me where do they live, and I said they live in a block of flats, and they live in Copenhagen, and there are certain things I just knew about them, and then actually having the chance to make this world was really fun. I enjoyed it.
Fantastic.
But yes. So moving on to them. Oh, there they are. I don't know why they come in like that, but they do. So yes, that's back to Clarice Bean again, and the Ruby world, and then what happened with Ruby that was very interesting is they were never intended to be books, And then I started getting letters from Clarice readers saying, where can I buy the Ruby Redford books, like they were real books.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it was such a charming idea that these books might actually exist. One day my agent got a phone call from a librarian in Kentucky saying, this child keeps coming in and asking for the Ruby Redford books. Can you please confirm that these books do not exist? And then we thought, oh, maybe we should write them.
Yeah.
And so thought that I would write 6 really silly adventure crime books. And then started, and the second I started, I realised I'm going to be bored rigid if I write them as they are in Clarice Bean, because they're written to be very, very silly,
yes,
kind of pulp fiction and throwaway novels. And so then I had to think, how do you make really good crime fiction but work for people of a certain age?
So they're more. They're more sophisticated. They're novels in their own right, obviously.
Yes,
And you were saying that they riff off Hitchcock to some extent. You really like the idea of the thriller, the pure thriller.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love. Hitchcock at his most family. Not talking about Psycho or anything, but
that could be that.
Yeah. But the kind of Hitchcocks like Rear Window and North by Northwest, which you can perfectly well watch when you're reasonably young. What he does so brilliantly is the sets are wonderful, because he obviously loves modernity and beautiful houses, and he loves beautiful costumes, but he also really loves that banter, that sort of hilarious kind of domestic banter or flirting, and so the stories or the films, you get totally absorbed, and there are times when you're sort of forgetting that you're in a thriller because they've gone off into this lovely sort of dinner world. Yes.
Yeah,
and they're so busy talking about something else that you've forgotten, and that's what gives you that sense of, as soon as you remember that they're in jeopardy, your heart starts racing again. And I think that's what he did so beautifully.
Yes, it's an almost pause, and then you're off again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and oh no, we're going to go off a building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get that, and that sort of comic, that sort of slightly graphic novel comic feeling as well. So these are drawings I did for Ruby, which I only put in the book, and the very last book, book 6, I drew some of the characters. But it was sort of fun thinking about them. I have to know what people might look like and what the world looks like. Oh, I can't write. It's a really... I don't know if everybody's like that, but...
probably. I would have
they
thought...
might well be.
It's
really it's really difficult to know, because, some writers can't write at all unless they know the end, or they know where their plot's going, and I never know where my plot's going.
Oh, that's interesting.
No.
So you start page 1?
No, I start on page 56.
Page 56.
Yeah.
And then go outwards
and then try and find the edges. So, yeah.
Have you got the slide of the map?
The map, let's
Ruby's
see if I've
world.
got the...
Where's that?
Oh,
no, these are great.
This is the comics. This just happened to be the next one, which is really where Alex and I were talking about what do you have in common with a graphic novel or a comic and a picture book and a film, which is you're so much telling the story visually, and actually often the fewer words the better.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely subscribe to that. And the young romance, that we thought that image was really...
Yeah.
It says everything, really.
It's beautiful. If you can see it, that you're seeing this girl crying, and in her sunglasses are reflected a couple who are kissing, a boy and a girl who are kissing. And we're so good at just, in an instant, knowing she must be crying because she's in love with either one of them. There's something going on, and we know it that quickly. And I think always... what I find with some of the less good films, and I always think it's so valuable to watch bad movies, is that they'll over-explain everything, and you don't need to. You just need to see that image, and and it's the same actually in books. I think you don't need to over-explain, and I think we often forget how quickly children pick up things. I think young people are particularly good at reading visual things, and so I think there's a lot of talking down to that isn't necessary.
Yeah, I think that's right, and sort of the over-explaining actually then makes it dull. So to have,
Yeah.
those images, and children read films very well, I think.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they read it on every level, but they do understand quite sparse information.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why films that do tell lots of different stories are fantastic for families, because everyone's taking a different line on the film, and you see something different every time you watch.
Yeah. Well, that's what I really think about the Clarice Bean family, is that it has the whole spectrum and generations as well.
Yes, because I want you to feel sorry for the parents as well, because even though I didn't have a child when I wrote them, and I was probably a lot more sort of on my parents' case and thought about all the rubbish things that they did, but I can still see, that it's unfair, because you're not born a parent, and just when you have your child doesn't mean you know what you're doing.
That's very true.
And it's quite a shock when you realise that as a child, that your parents don't know what they're doing, and they're making it up as they go along.
Yeah. Normally happens quite late.
Yes,
actually.
No, my sister cottoned on when she was very small to the fact that my parents didn't know what they were doing, but I completely was there believing it. So.
And the game was a shock when you were 17.
Yeah, I know. They don't know. But I put these up because these are sort of wonderful book jackets and things, and they're sort of, Raymond Chandler is also a wonderful writer of banter and dialogue and
economy.
Yes, and economy, and Elmore Leonard the same. And but also, I wanted to set Ruby in the past, so we spent ages, my designer and I. These are early book jackets that we were thinking about, and we ended up with something that looked sort of quite sort of old school in a way, but quite comic strip, because I wanted us to step back in time, because I needed it to be set in the past, before Google, before mobile phones, because a mobile phone just ruins a thriller.
Completely.
I mean,
and Google. I mean, you can find everything out.
Oh yeah, that's what you do. And it's such a problem, because in the olden days, people were always running to find a phone box and then realising they didn't have 10p, and it was kind of brilliant that. And now you just got to run out of charge all the time, and it's just not very viable, is it? I mean, you can't constantly.
Not if you're a detective. No. You have a charger with you.
Exactly.
You? Yeah.
So I just thought, let's get rid of it all and set her back in time.
Good frocks as well.
Good what?
Frocks.
Frocks. Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Here's the map of Twynford. Yeah.
So this is Ruby's space, and so Lauren gave a cartographer the book and said, "Can you draw the world?" Because it was important to know how the world lay, and they got it pretty much right. She said it was incredible.
It was the weirdest thing, where I'd written 6 books all in my head. I sort of had all these road directions and things. So I'd say Ruby set out west along, Blueberry Road, up, Brown Street or whatever. And then this cartographer 6 years later had to sort of make all this world connect. And it was extraordinary how most of the roads are in the right place.
It's great.
So I feel like I might be good enough to be a taxi driver, because you have to remember things, don't you? So, yeah. And then the other reason for it being set in the 70s is, and you can't really see there, but that's a film still from the original Freaky Friday with Jodie Foster, which I always loved, because to me, she always felt like a real girl. And she's pretty much exactly the same age as me, a little bit older, but similar. And I liked the fact that she wasn't one of those sort of midrifty perfect tan girls. She looked just like a normal person.
Yes.
But she was mouthy, you would want to be her friend, because she wasn't going to be stepped on.
She's very engaging.
Yeah.
As a character.
Yeah.
It's very well written.
Yeah. And so I mean, Ruby Redford's character is sort of based on this character. And then this one, this slide, only the older people in the audience will know, but you may remember Jonathan and Jennifer Hart from the show Heart to Heart, which was about a millionaire couple who every week one of their best friends would be murdered, and they would have to figure out who murdered them. And if that didn't happen, what would happen was one of their best friends would be a murderer, and that was basically the plot every single week.
And they made a lot of them.
They made
They
so
had a lot
many
of
of
friends,
them.
that couple.
And they lived in such sort of glamour, and it was, my sister and I just loved watching it because it was just totally enjoyable, and because Jonathan and Jennifer never worried about anything, and Jonathan had this huge business that did really well called Hart Industries, but he never ever went to work. I mean, you very rarely see him there, and they just spent a lot of time having a good time,
Yes.
and always at the end, didn't matter who was murdered, how close they were, they would always end with having a glass of champagne. And I wanted to get that into the Ruby books. I wanted Ruby's parents to be like that, and I wanted her to have fun, not be an orphan, because so many children's books, particularly if they're of the action type, you get rid of the parents for obvious reasons, to give the child freedom. But I thought I'd rather give her freedom by her having such ridiculously stupid parents
Also,
that she
sort
can
of
do
jet
what she likes.
setting, always off on a
They're always
yacht.
off,
Or
exactly.
yeah.
I know, and you sort of want that, so they've sort of got no brains.
Yeah.
And they live this sort of rather marvellous world, in this lovely world. And when I'm sort of thinking about things, I often go to reference books, and this is I wanted Ruby's family to live in an incredible house, and I'm not saying it looks like this house, but it's important to remember that there's no house that you can imagine that hasn't already been built, really. I mean, it's astonishing. So this house, obviously, Frank Lloyd Wright, built on a waterfall, and I like to sort of think about all these things.
I think it's going to be an expensive film.
It's going to be an
make.
expensive movie,
Very expensive film to make. And you're going to be very exacting about what it looks like. Oh, this is a great one.
And this is just Cary Grant from North by Northwest, the Hitchcock movie. But the reason I put this in is because I think what I wanted to also do with Ruby, although Ruby is a schoolgirl, essentially, who just happens to be incredibly brainy, who then gets recruited in this really ridiculous way by a secret agency. I want you to feel like she is actually a schoolgirl, a real person, just as this man is a man who is about to go out for dinner with his old mum, and then he gets suddenly kidnapped. And it doesn't matter that he's innocent of whatever these kidnappers think he's guilty of. It doesn't matter, because they're going to kill him anyway. So he has to figure it out. And I wanted that same thing for Ruby. She has to go to school because she's a schoolgirl, but she also has to do all this other
also
work.
happens to be
Saving the world.
Saving the world.
Yeah. So that was sort of all part of it. So yes, that's just the Hitchcock and James Bondy thing, where I also wanted to bring in, those really terrifying villains that you always get, exaggerated villains. Proper villains. Yeah, that
exactly.
We're going to do really dreadful things in a very elaborate way.
Have you drawn all the villains?
I've drawn some of them.
Some of them, yeah.
So just some of them.
Yeah.
But they're sort of fun in my head. I can see them, and I think a lot of that and that surviving really gruesome, possible gruesome deaths and things come from my love of and fear also of Jaws. So when I was a child, I must have been about 9. I was walking along in Leigh-on-Sea, which is in Essex, if you've ever been, and it's a place where my granny lived. And we were walking past a bus stop, and then there was this massive poster of a shark's head and this little figure swimming along. And from then on, I didn't want to go in the sea. And my mum kept saying, "But darling, it's an estuary. There aren't any great white sharks." But there is always the possibility that there might be, and that's the thing, and that's why it's so powerful. And I think, isn't it amazing that this is actually not a photograph, this is a painting, and yet it has encouraged an awful lot of people to stay out of the water. It's had a profound effect on my generation.
Name.
Yeah, it's amazing.
We love whales and we hate
sharks.
I know.
And so I think that image thing, you know, the power of a film, the power of a drawing, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
But I wanted, in order to get over my deep fear of sharks, and I did go swimming in America this year, which is first for a very, very long time, was researching things. So within the Ruby books, there's a lot of fact, and I wanted to make sure that things are solved. So I read the SAS handbook because there's some really useful tips, and it did solve for me one of those sort of lifetime mysteries for me, where if you're marooned at sea, should you drink your own urine or should you not? And the SAS handbook, I can believe says, no, you should not. So it's a very comforting feeling that should you get marooned at sea, you can die without having to do that. You know, don't waste your time.
I love that. Never drink either. Never. Right.
And so, but that, I think that's the real fun of writing something that's got an awful lot of fact in it, but it's also silly. So you have to figure out what's real and what's not real. Yeah. And I had quite a lot of fun, sort of just planning it and figuring it out.
So if you made a film of Ruby, would you make it as a would you want to make it as a live action?
Yeah, I think I would.
And who would play her? How old do you?
Well, she's 13.
She's 13. Yeah.
So if I could go back in time, I would have Jodie Foster or Christina Ricci or Tatum O'Neill, somebody who can really act like a child. Yes. And it's quite hard. I mean, you see them every now and again. Every time I see someone who's brilliant, I think, and they will never be able to play her because they're all too old.
All too old, but there'll be someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So, Tuesday's
going to do the roving mic, aren't you, in case someone wants to ask a question?
If anyone has any questions, let's hope someone has a question.
Do you want to where is the microphone?
I think
Simon.
Do you have a mic?
So, okay.
It's 2:45.
Okay. Are we all right or not?
No, fine, I think. Someone might have... No one might have...
Oh, Tuesday behind you, darling.
Was that you, Jack?
Oh.
Did you put your hand up? No. So nobody has a question. Oh, there's one here.
About the process of going from the book, Charlie and Lola, and to animation, and how that came about for you, whether that was something you decided or whether someone approached you, and how that came about. And also maybe the second one, how the characters Charlie and Lola came to your mind. How
in the very first place?
Yeah.
So what had happened was when I first written Clarice Bean, I was terribly excited because it immediately got optioned as a film. And I was very, very naive, and so I had this sort of idea it was all going to get made and it was all going to be wonderful. And then sort of practically nothing happened. And then we'd have a few conversations and they'd start talking about Clarice in a way that I thought, oh no, you know, she wouldn't listen to that kind of music, or you know, and I realised how much I minded. And so when that lapsed, I just thought I'm not going to have it re-optioned because I just don't know how to do it. But I suggested, because someone had come forward and said we'd really like to make Clarice Bean, and I said no, but how about Charlie and Lola, because I can see how that would work. And then by sheer coincidence, the guys who made Peppa Pig, but they hadn't made Peppa Pig at that point, got in touch with me and they'd sent me a little tiny animation of Lola dropping a tomato off a chair. And they said, we'd really like to make Charlie and Lola. And I just thought they were amazing. And so I thought, yes, I really want to work with them. And then, of course, Peppa Pig struck. And that was that. They were so busy with Peppa Pig. So they didn't make it, but Tiger Aspect did. And I'd sort of persuaded Tiger, don't take Clarice, take Charlie and Lola. So that's actually what happened. But I'd learnt such a big lesson from the previous thing being optioned about getting in writing all the things creatively that I wanted in the TV series. So children's voices, I said I want this kind of voice, I want this kind of music. So I was quite sort of on it at that point. And then the children themselves, the idea themselves came from my own childhood, really, of being a fussy eater but having a very responsible sister so whenever I would I'd be sitting at the table, because it was in the days of if you don't finish your dinner you can't get down, sort of thing. And so whenever my parents went out of the room, she would scrape it into the bin for me. So that was that thing came from really my own childhood. Okay.
There's one there at the back.
There were a lot of kids books about like kid spies, like Alex Rider.
Mm-hmm.
Did you struggle to not follow the exact same patterns as any of them? Because they're all like kid goes to school, becomes a spy,
Yeah.
awesome. So.
Yeah. Yes, I know what you mean. Well, I hadn't thought about it at all, because when I was writing the books within the books, so when I was writing Ruby Redford as a sort of joke within the Clarice books, I was just writing any old nonsense, because they were never intended to be books. They were much more based on those really cheesy sort of TV programs that you'd watch, the American ones where they say, "Gee, Clarence, what's that?" And and someone would then go off down a tunnel or something and disappear. And they were very much written to be jokes. And then when it came to writing them, I didn't look at any children's stuff. I actually tend not to read anyone else's children's fiction, because it sort of contaminates your brain, and then you're worried, have you thought of that, or was it someone else, and where did you get your idea from? So actually I read a lot of adult crime fiction and thrillers. So I read a lot of Stephen King and a lot of Elmore Leonard and Raymond Chandler. Yes, and I love crime and thrillers. So I listen to a lot as well. And it really helps you get the sort of rhythm of it and the pace. Because I think really, yes, of course, in a way you're writing for a different audience, but the most important thing I feel is always to write for myself and write about things I'm interested in. So yes, you change perhaps the level of scary, but you don't change the way, the sophistication, and the integrity. So you can only write things that you love writing.
I think we've got time for one
There's
more
one there. Yeah.
One more there and one at the back, and then I think we...
Hi. I was wondering, when you talked about your fear of the sea,
Yes.
and in the Ruby books, Clancy has his fear of water and the sea, and I was wondering what sort of elements of your character you put into the characters that you've written, and also which of your characters do you identify with the most?
Oh, that's a very good question. Well, I think that the second Ruby book, which is I can't remember. You can remember what it's called now, but yes, I loved writing that, because it is all about someone having a complete fear of sharks, and I know that so viscerally. It's in me. I just know that feeling. So writing that was really good, because I felt I've done the research. I am the research, and I know a lot about all these kind of sea disasters, because I'm so obsessed with the fear of it happening that I've looked it all up. So in that instance, Clancy is very me. But actually, he's also a lot of other things, because he's much braver than I am, really. I mean, I loved writing him as a character, because I'm almost writing, what would your ideal friend be like? If you could put together a friend, what would they be? And I think loyalty and someone who's really funny is almost the best combination, that it's such a lovely one. But there's lots of me and lots of the characters, but there's also a lot of other people in them too. So some characters are based on people I know, but they're there'll be a whole mishmash of maybe 4 people inside one character. Okay, Tuesday?
There's one man at the back there.
All of your work has a kind of necessary and considered naivety, whether it's in the writing and or in the illustration. Since like the birth of Charlie and Lola, how have you managed to retain that level of naivety, delivering that with the pressures of editors, publishers, and filmmakers? When
in Charlie and Lola, particularly, maybe, it's difficult, and I think Charlie and Lola is such a it's so much a world that I understand. So, but it takes a little time. So I'm going to write another Clarice Bean book, but so I have to read everything again to get her voice back, because in a way she's an innocent, but she's quite a sophisticated thinker. Whereas Charlie and Lola, Charlie is really he's like a very young and innocent child who's trying to figure out how to be a grown-up in a way. What would a grown-up do, sort of thing. And she's completely in awe of him, I always think. In the show, it was very difficult to keep that, because I'm working with 50 people, and I kept saying, you have to think of a child that looks up at you and blinks and says, why? That's what Lola is. But actually, if you watch the shows, they've aged her up, and she's way more knowing than I think of her, because I think she's about 2.5 or 3. She's a very, very young child. And so that was a concession I had to make, really, because there was no way that we could keep it running for as many episodes. And
probably too sophisticated in a way for a 2.5 to 3-year-old, like a preschool audience.
Absolutely.
Because it was a, 5, 6, 7,
totally,
and up to me audience.
Yes, exactly.
To make it universal, she probably had to be a little bit older.
She
but
did.
I can see that must have been a real
It was
conflict.
really difficult. So because I've only written, I think, 7 Charlie and Lola picture books. All the other ones you see, bar some little board books, are all television tie-in books. And so I haven't done that many, but I know them very well in my head. And so it was a real relief for me when I went back to them, and I thought, no, this is what they're like. This is them. But I do draw them differently. That I'm finding it very hard to draw them as I once did, because I did the first one nearly 20 years ago, and I can't draw like that anymore. So I always have, but as a tool. So it's a bit like having a very, it's like having a photocopier or something else. It's everything is hand drawn, and everything is snipped out artwork. So it's all done like that. But it's very useful if you want to replicate something or resize it. So I use it for that.
But you still cut them out.
But everything is still actual artwork. So if you saw it, that's what it looks like. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Lauren.
Thank you.
For talking to us.
Thank you, Lauren and Alex. You could stay for just 1 minute. One of the things we're doing this weekend is raising a little bit of money for the Holt Youth Centre. And Lauren has kindly donated something very special, which I'm going to auction now. I know I've got quite a lot of interest already. So maybe, Lauren, you could say something.
I can explain what it is. We did so I think we picked about, maybe it was 50 stills from the Charlie and Lola animation. So these are stills from the various shows, and they never do them twice. And I don't think they really haven't done them again. So this is the last one that we have, but it's from I'm Not Sleepy and I Will Not Go to Bed. And so it's just a little still from the TV show.
Thank you
No,
very much,
it's
Laura.
pleasure.
Well, I'm going to go into like auctioneer mode now. So, someone start me with £50.
Oh.
75? £75. 80 anywhere? £80. 90? £90. £100. 110 anywhere? 110.
I really want it.
Stop it. You're putting off the competition. 130 there. 140. 150 anywhere? 150. 160. 170 anywhere? 170. 190 anywhere? 190. 210 anywhere? 210. 230 anybody? 230?
Two there.
230. 250 somewhere? 250 pounds. 270. 270. 270 pounds. 280.
270.
270 pounds. 290 anywhere. 300 pounds. Thank you. 310 anywhere. Anywhere for anyone for 310. 310 pounds. Anywhere. Going once. Going twice. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. Maureen will be talking in about 10 minutes, so if anyone would like to come back and support that talk, that'd be wonderful. Thank you very much for coming. Oh, sorry. Lauren will be signing some books. She didn't know that, but she is. No.
And it's Jessica next. It's Jessica next.
Oh, sorry, Jessica will be talking. And there are some books for sale which Lauren will be signing at the back of the room. Thank you very much.